Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we're going to do something a little different. Forget scrolling through TikTok or checking your notifications. It's time to travel back hundreds of years. Imagine you wake up in the Middle Ages, and instead of grabbing your phone to scroll through memes, you grab a pair of iron pliers. No alarm clock, no coffee, no cozy blanket. Just the faint smell of mildew, sweat, and whatever unfortunate soul is waiting for you in the dungeon. Congratulations, you are the local torturer. Now, before you get too excited, this isn't the glamorous, high-paying, villain from a movie type of job. Nobody invites you to parties. Nobody wants to sit next to you at dinner. In fact, most people would rather cross the street than make eye contact with you. Sure, you have job security, but your career perks include bad smells, bloodstains you can't wash out, and the occasional angry mob. Being a medieval torturer sounds powerful, but in reality, it sucked. And tonight, as you settle in to drift towards sleep, we'll explore exactly why. From the tools you carried, to the people you worked for, to the nightmares you couldn't escape, this is the story of the job you definitely wouldn't want on your medieval resume. Close your eyes and picture it. The year is somewhere in the late 14th century. Europe is a patchwork quilt of kingdoms, duchies, and small towns with names you can't pronounce. Castles dot the landscape like giant stone mushrooms. Cathedrals rise with spires pointing accusingly at heaven. And the average villager believes diseases are caused by bad smells, sinful thoughts, or maybe an evil glance from their neighbor's goat. It's not exactly the world of Wi-Fi and running water. Streets are muddy rivers of waste. People bathe once a season if they're lucky. And the sweet perfume of life is mostly dung, sweat, and smoke. Bread is hard enough to chip a tooth. Meat is rare enough to start rumors. And vegetables are considered punishment for being poor. But tucked away in this world of prayers, plagues and peasants is you, the medieval torturer. Your office is not a cozy cubicle with an ergonomic chair. No, it's a damp stone chamber beneath the castle, lit by sputtering torches, decorated with chains, and perfumed by iron, mildew, and blood. It echoes with the sound of dripping water and the occasional scream. Basically, the medieval version of a heavy metal concert, except you don't get paid in ticket sales, only in side-eye from your neighbors. Historically, torturers weren't glamorous figures of power. They were necessary cogs in the machinery of justice, or at least what kings and bishops claimed was justice. Your job was not about truth, fairness, or dignity. It was about fear. People feared you more than they respected you. You were the one who turned suspicion into confession, sometimes with nothing more than the sight of your tools. Imagine being introduced at a party. This is John, he plays the lute. And this is you, the guy who pulls out fingernails for a living. Conversation killer, instantly. And the culture around you doesn't help. The church preaches salvation, yet commissions torture for heretics. Kings and lords demand loyalty, and anyone who looks the wrong way might end up in your chair. Ordinary people both despise and need you, because in their world, suffering isn't just punishment, it's theatre. Trials are less about guilt and more about performance, with you as the stagehand. If the accused cries, begs, or screams, everyone believes justice has been served. The sounds of your world are constant. Bells ringing to mark the hours, merchants shouting about rotten fish, children crying, dogs barking, and deep beneath it all, the dull clang of iron. The sights are equally charming. Muddy boots, crooked teeth, stained robes, plague boils, rats everywhere. And then there's your workplace decor, racks, chains, ropes, spikes. You won't find that in an IKEA catalogue. The smells? Let's just say you don't need scented candles. A combination of damp stone, mold, human sweat, and blood creates an aroma that clings to your clothes no matter how hard you scrub. Forget cologne. You smell like fear and despair, and everyone around you notices, which explains why people don't invite you to weddings. As the torturer, you are both invisible and unforgettable. Lords will summon you when they need a confession. Priests will quietly bless your work while never admitting it out loud. Villagers whisper about you. Children run from you, and even your fellow townsfolk avoid eye contact. Yet you walk with an odd kind of authority, because no one dares cross the man who knows how to stretch bodies like dough. There's also irony in your status. On paper, you are serving justice. In practice, you're a mix of jailer, executioner, and boogeyman. And while the higher classes might see you as a tool, the lower classes see you as cursed. Sometimes people believe torturers carried bad luck, that their souls were doomed. In a deeply religious culture, that's not the reputation you want when you're trying to buy bread. Still, this is your world. No podcasts, no Netflix, no social media likes. Your entertainment is watching drunk villagers brawl in the market, or a procession of monks chanting for hours. Your job is not glamorous, but it is secure. Because unfortunately, there's always someone accused of something. And unlike the baker, whose bread might go stale, or the blacksmith, whose tools might break, your product never goes out of demand. Fear is always fashionable. So you wake up each day not with a smile, but with a sigh. You put on your rough wool tunic, scratchy against your skin, strap on your belt of tools, and head down to the cold chamber that will define your hours. Outside, the world smells like manure and barley. Inside, it smells like rust and sweat. Either way, you're not escaping the stink. And so your day begins. Daily life and routine. The rooster doesn't wake you. He probably ran away years ago because even chickens don't want to live near you. Instead, you wake up to the damp smell of your own straw mattress. Fleas crawl across your arms, and the blanket scratching your skin feels less like wool and more like sandpaper. This is not the glamorous rise and grind morning routine of modern influencers. There's no sunlight yoga session, no soy latte with oat milk. Just you, groaning, stretching stiff muscles, and realizing your tunic still smells faintly of iron and sweat from yesterday. Breakfast isn't better. Forget eggs, bacon, or toast. You chew on coarse black bread so hard it could double as a weapon. If you're lucky, you dunk it in watered-down ale or a thin onion soup that smells suspiciously like your neighbor's boots. Meat, maybe once a month. Milk? Only if the cow hasn't been stolen, sick, or excommunicated by the church. Most mornings it's bread, a questionable stew, or nothing at all. Yet, as you gnaw at the bread like a medieval beaver, you remind yourself, you've got a job, and in a world of endless famine, that's something. Getting dressed is no better. Your work clothes are practical, not fashionable. A coarse wool tunic, hose that itch like poison ivy, and heavy boots that never fully dry. Over this, you might wear a leather apron, because nothing says career pride like an apron permanently stained with fluids no one wants to identify. Unlike a knight's shining armor or a nobleman's velvet cloak, your outfit doesn't inspire admiration. It inspires pity, fear, and the occasional whispered prayer. You strap on your tool belt, though it looks nothing like a modern handyman's. No shiny drill or measuring tape here. Instead, you carry ropes, tongs, knives, and sometimes a pouch of coal or wax. Each item has its own grim purpose, but in your world, they're just the necessities. People in the village know what those tools mean. When they see them hanging from your belt, they don't ask for help fixing a chair. They cross themselves and hurry away. The walk to your workplace isn't much of a commute, but it might be the least enjoyable part of the day. Through the muddy, narrow streets, you dodge chamber pots being emptied from upper windows. Every step risks a splash of something that is definitely not water. People glance at you, then quickly look away. It's not just that you smell of metal and mildew, it's that your very presence reminds them of pain. You're the medieval equivalent of a tax collector, dentist, and executioner rolled into one. Nobody wants to make small talk. Arriving at the castle or town hall, you descend into the underworld, your dungeon. The air shifts from the stink of manure to the damp, suffocating smell of stone and rot. Torches sputter, dripping wax and smoke. Water drips from the ceiling in irregular beats, echoing like a heartbeat. This is your office, your factory, your personal nightmare chamber. And while nobles and judges will never set foot here, you spend most of your waking hours surrounded by racks, chains, and iron maidens. Once inside, your first task is maintenance. Like a modern mechanic checking tools, you inspect ropes for fraying, oil the hinges on shackles, sharpen blades, and make sure everything is in working order. Nothing says unprofessional like a rusty rack or a blunt knife. And though no one praises your craftsmanship, you take grim pride in it. The baker gets compliments on his bread, the blacksmith on his swords. But you, the silence after a scream is your applause. And then there's the waiting. You don't choose your clients. They're sent to you by judges, priests, or lords. Maybe it's a thief caught stealing bread, a woman accused of witchcraft, or a man who muttered something about the king's nose being too big. The crimes don't matter. What matters is your role in the theatre of justice, to make them confess, whether guilty or not. Sometimes you wait hours, sitting in the half-dark, chewing the same hard bread from breakfast, trying not to notice the smell of old sweat in your clothes. The dungeon is both your workplace and your prison. Day after day, it seeps into you, until even sunlight feels like an alien concept. And yet, despite the misery, your routine has a rhythm. You wake, you eat, you dress, you descend, you check your tools, and then you wait. Not for glory, not for honor, but for the next unfortunate soul who will be dragged down the steps. And you know, deep in your bones, that your day has only just begun. Once the waiting is over, the real work begins. The heavy wooden door groans open. Guards stomp down the steps, and between them stumbles your guest of the day. Maybe he's a thief who tried to steal bread. Maybe she's accused of witchcraft because the neighbor's cow suddenly stopped producing milk. Or maybe it's just someone who annoyed the wrong noble. Their crime doesn't really matter. You already know how their day will end, and it won't be with tea and biscuits. Your role is part mechanic, part actor, part nightmare. First comes the show. The prisoner must be scared before the tools even touch them. You pace slowly across the room, dragging a chain along the floor so it clinks in the silence. The torches flicker across your apron, stained with shadows. In today's world, this would be the equivalent of a dentist leaving all their drills out on the counter, buzzing them one by one before touching your teeth. The idea is clear. Fear is half the job. Between performances, you also have chores. Your tools must be spotless, not because you care about germs. Nobody in the Middle Ages knew what those were, but because rusty blades break too easily. You sharpen knives on a whetstone, polish iron cuffs, and oil the wooden rollers of the rack. Imagine being a car mechanic, except your car screams and bleeds when you adjust it. Food breaks happen, but don't get too excited. Lunch is the same old story. Hard bread, salty cheese if you're lucky, and ale that tastes like vinegar pretending to be beer. Sometimes the guards share a pot of stew, watery broth with a few floating beans and maybe a bone or two for flavor. As you sit hunched over your bowl, you notice how everyone else at the table avoids making eye contact with you. Even the guards, who literally dragged the prisoner here, don't want to chat with the torturer during mealtime. You're like the unpopular kid at the cafeteria, except instead of having bad fashion, you just happen to spend your day pulling people's joints out of sockets. After lunch, it's back to the dungeon. Your sessions could last minutes or hours. Some prisoners faint immediately, others scream until their voices break. And you just keep going. It's not glory, it's not honor, it's just your job. At times you wonder how many more years your ears can take the endless echo of cries bouncing off the stone walls. No medieval therapist is going to help you unpack that trauma. Instead, you drink more ale at night and hope the nightmares don't wake you before dawn. Your routine isn't all screaming in chains, though. Paperwork, yes, even medieval torturers had paperwork, creeps into your day. The judge or priest expects a written record. What was asked, how the prisoner responded, how many times they screamed the same confession. Quills scratch against parchment as you scribble down the ugly details by torchlight. Imagine filling out Excel sheets today, except instead of sales numbers, you're logging how many fingernails you pulled out. Evening comes, but your job isn't done. Another knock, another set of guards, another prisoner who swears they're innocent. Sometimes you believe them, but your belief doesn't matter. You're a cog in a machine larger than yourself. By sunset, your clothes stink of sweat, iron, and smoke. Your hands ache, your back aches, your soul aches. And when you finally drag yourself home, it isn't to comfort or companionship. Villagers still avoid you, and even your own family keeps their distance. Dinner is whatever leftovers survived lunch. Maybe a slice of bread dunked in watered-down ale. No feasts, no meat-filled platters, no royal banquets. Just another bite of black bread before collapsing back onto your flea-infested mattress. Tomorrow, the same routine waits for you again. Wake up, eat stale bread, descend into darkness, sharpen your knives, scare the next soul, record their pain, and fall asleep hoping you can forget it all. This is your daily rhythm. No glory, no respect, no clean conscience. Just another day in the life of a medieval torturer. And whether you like it or not, tomorrow morning, that same hard bread will be waiting for you, daring your teeth to survive another round. Workplace. Environment. If you've ever complained about your office being soul-crushing, congratulations. You would have fit right in during the Middle Ages. Because as a medieval torturer, your workplace isn't a cubicle with fluorescent lights and squeaky chairs. It's a dungeon, and trust me, even the worst Monday morning staff meeting can't compare to walking into a stone chamber that smells like mold, ash, and 20 years of bad decisions. Let's set the scene. The dungeon is underground, carved from thick stone, with ceilings low enough to bump your head on if you're taller than average. The air is damp, heavy, and always cold, even in summer. In fact, the chill works in your favor. It helps keep the place smelling only slightly worse than a spoiled pantry. The walls drip with condensation, streaked with moss in places, and torchlight flickers against the wet stone, casting long shadows that make every iron hook and chain look like a monster lurking in the dark. The floor is uneven cobblestone, half covered with hay or rushes meant to soak things up. I'll spare you the details, but the things they're soaking up are not water. Every step squishes faintly, and sometimes you wonder whether the sound is mud, rats, or something far less pleasant. Modern offices might have carpet stains from spilled coffee. Your office stains are, well, let's just say they don't come out with soap. There's no fresh air. Instead, the smell is a cocktail of sweat, blood, unwashed prisoners, damp stone, and smoke from torches. Imagine walking into a gym bag that hasn't been opened in 6 months, mixing it with a campfire, then locking yourself inside. And yet, after a few years, you hardly notice anymore. The stench becomes background noise like elevator music, annoying but always there. Your decor. Forget posters that say teamwork, or hang in there. The walls are decorated with racks, chains, ropes, cages, and the occasional skeleton left behind for dramatic effect. Nobles love that touch. It's like medieval interior design, except instead of feng shui, it's just fear. In the corner sits your pride and joy, the torture chair. Covered in spikes, it looks less like furniture and more like a nightmare invented by someone who thought regular chairs just aren't uncomfortable enough. Next to it lies the rack, a massive wooden frame with rollers designed to stretch a person like their medieval pizza dough. You keep it oiled and polished, not because you're sentimental, but because squeaky gears ruin the atmosphere. Other tools are scattered around, each with its own personality. Iron pincers for pulling nails, branding irons for leaving permanent reminders, thumb screws for when you feel like ruining someone's handshakes forever, buckets of water for dunking methods, ropes for suspension, chains for restraint, even wax and feathers have their place. You'd be surprised how creative medieval justice could get. Your colleagues? Well, let's just say you're not the most popular in the castle. The guards treat you with a mix of fear and pity. They'll haul prisoners down, but they never linger, like delivery drivers who drop off food and sprint away. Clerks occasionally show up to witness confessions, scribbling notes as you work, though most of them stare too long at their shoes, hoping to forget what they've seen. And the nobles, they prefer to keep their hands clean. They order, you execute. To them, you're just another tool, no more important than the rope or the iron bars. Still, you aren't alone. Rats are your true co-workers. They scurry across the floor, squeaking through piles of straw, bold enough to nibble at discarded scraps. Sometimes they even nibble at things you wish they wouldn't. You don't bother chasing them anymore. They're part of the team now, unpaid interns who never leave. Weirdly enough, some dungeons doubled as storage. Barrels of grain or wine might share space with shackles and racks. Imagine popping down to grab a cask of ale and having to step around someone chained to the wall. Medieval efficiency at its finest. And if you think OSHA would have approved, think again. Fire hazards, trip hazards, biohazards. You name it, you had it. The acoustics are unforgettable. Every scream, every groan, every clank of chains echoes down the hallways. A single cry could carry all the way up to the courtyard, which, of course, was intentional. Torture wasn't just about the prisoner. It was about everyone else hearing it too. Fear spreads faster than disease. You were less of an interrogator and more of a medieval sound engineer, mixing the soundtrack of terror for the whole town. Lighting was another perk. With only flickering torches, shadows danced across the stone, making every tool look twice as big and twice as menacing. You could wave a hook near the wall and let its shadow tower above the prisoner's head, convincing them you had something monstrous in store. In truth, your tools were already terrifying enough. Despite all this, you learn to adapt. Your ears grow used to the endless echoes. Your eyes adjust to the half-darkness. You barely notice the smell unless it's a particularly bad day. Over time, the dungeon becomes less of a nightmare and more of an office you simply hate but tolerate. After all, the baker tolerates flour dust, the shepherd tolerates sheep smell, and you, well, you tolerate human misery. This environment isn't just your workplace, it's your identity. When villagers whisper about you, they don't picture your face, they picture your dungeon. And for better or worse, that damp, echoing stone chamber becomes as much a part of you as the apron you wear. And so, another torch flickers, another chain rattles, another shadow stretches across the wall. Your day continues, not in an office with ergonomic chairs, but in a chamber designed to make nightmares real. Let's dive even deeper into your workplace, because a medieval dungeon isn't just four walls and a rack. It's practically a living organism, breathing misery in and out. Every corner has its own story, and every tool has a history attached to it. Most of them horrifying, some of them just plain weird. The layout of your office. Your workplace is usually divided into sections. There's the main chamber, where most of the sessions happen. This is the public stage, the spot where prisoners are strapped to chairs, racks, or suspended from beams. Then there are smaller side rooms, some used for storage, others for private interrogations. If you think open-plan offices today are bad, at least your manager isn't holding screaming meetings right next to the filing cabinet. The dungeon also has cells, tiny stone closets where prisoners wait their turn. Each cell is about the size of a modern bathroom stall, but with less comfort and far more rats. No bed, no toilet, no light. Just straw on the floor and maybe a bucket if the jailer remembered. Prisoners sometimes scratch graffiti into the walls. Prayers, names, or just tally marks counting the days. Historians have actually found these carvings, evidence that even in the darkest places, people tried to leave some mark of their existence. Tools of the trade are the tools. They're your co-stars in this nightmare theatre. Let's meet the cast. The rack, the superstar of the torture world. A wooden frame with rollers at either end, ropes attached to wrists and ankles. Turn the handle and stretch. The sound of popping joints is basically the dungeon's soundtrack. You don't even need to use it all the way. Half the fear comes from prisoners watching someone else get strapped in. The iron chair, covered in spikes, heated from beneath with coals. Sit down, and suddenly your coffee break seems like paradise. The pair of anguish, a metal device inserted into, well, places you'd rather not imagine, then expanded with a screw. It was supposedly used for liars, blasphemers, and anyone the torturer's boss didn't like that day. Thumb screws, small, portable, and effective. Clamp them on fingers or toes, twist, and you've got yourself a confession starter kit. Branding irons. Heat them in the fire, press against skin, and leave a permanent reminder. Medieval tattoos, but way less fun. The whip and cat o' nine tails, because sometimes the classics never go out of style. Each tool had a purpose, but more importantly, each tool had an audience. The prisoner was the main victim, but the spectators, the guards, the clerks, the occasional noble, were the real targets. Torture was theatre, and you were the stage manager. Soundscape of the dungeon. Every office has its background noise, printers humming, keyboards clacking, someone slurping coffee. Your dungeon has a very different playlist. The clank of chains, swinging against stone, the drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling, the scurry of rats under, straw, the crackling of torches on the walls, and of course, the screams, long, echoing, distorted by stone until they sound almost inhuman. What's worse is how sound carries. A scream in one chamber could be heard across the courtyard. That wasn't an accident, it was the point. The dungeon was a loudspeaker, broadcasting fear into the streets. Even people who never set foot inside felt its presence. Smells of the job if smell-o-vision existed. This section would be unbearable. The dungeon smells like everything people try to avoid. Sweat, rot, mildew, smoke, blood, unwashed bodies. Add in the occasional burst of burning hair or singed flesh, and you've got a recipe for nausea. People today complain about co-workers microwaving fish in the office. Imagine if that co-worker also brought along a bucket of pig guts. Colleagues and teamwork. We've talked about guards and clerks, but you sometimes work alongside specialists. Blacksmiths forge custom shackles. Carpenters build new racks or gallows. And physicians, yes, physicians, occasionally assist. Not to heal, of course, but to make sure the prisoner doesn't die too soon. After all, a dead prisoner can't confess. Doctors were basically the HR department of torture, making sure everything stayed productive. Your bosses, the nobles or judges, rarely set foot inside. They prefer to give orders from above, sipping wine while you do the dirty work. To them, you're not a colleague, you're disposable. If the townsfolk ever riot, guess who gets thrown to the mob first? Spoiler, not the noble sipping wine. Weird historical facts. Some dungeons were actually multi-purpose rooms. In certain castles, the same chamber was used for storing food and interrogating prisoners. Nothing says fresh cheese like being aged next to a rack. Torturers were sometimes paid per confession. Talk about a sales quota. No wonder so many witches admitted to flying on. Broomsticks.tools were occasionally blessed by priests before use, because apparently divine approval was needed before pulling someone's limbs apart. Some towns built fake torture chambers with scary props just for intimidation. Sometimes fear alone was enough to get the job done, saving you the trouble of actually stretching someone like medieval bubblegum. Daily maintenance. Like any workplace, there's upkeep. You sweep straw, clean tools, refill torches, and occasionally patch cracks in the walls. It's janitorial work, except your mop bucket comes with extra fluids. A torturer without maintenance skills wouldn't last long. Rusty iron and frayed ropes make for very embarrassing workplace accidents. Imagine explaining to your boss that the prisoner slipped off the rack because you forgot to oil it. Not a good look. Transition. By the end of the day, the dungeon feels less like a workplace and more like a second skin. The smells stick to you. The echoes ring in your ears, and the shadows dance behind your eyelids, even after you've gone home. This isn't just where you work, it's who you are. And as you blow out the last torch, locking the heavy door behind you, one thought lingers. Tomorrow, it all starts again. Congratulations, you're famous. But not the paparazzi following you around, autograph signing type of famous. Nope. You're famous the way a sewer is famous. Everybody knows it exists. Nobody wants to get too close. In your town, your very name sends shivers down spines. Not because people admire you, but because you are the medieval torturer. The human reminder that pain is just one bad decision away. But what does that really mean for your daily life? Fame without respect, work without comfort, and a legacy nobody in their right mind would envy. Welcome to the challenges and suffering of your profession, where every perk of the job is really just another curse dressed in chains. Physical wear and tear. Let's start with the most obvious. Your body. Being a torturer is brutal on your muscles, bones, and skin. You're not sitting in a cushy chair scribbling away on parchment. You're constantly on your feet, dragging prisoners who resist with every ounce of their being. You haul iron shackles heavy enough to anchor ships. You twist ropes until your palms split. You swing whips and hammers until your arms feel like they're filled with molten lead. And this isn't a once-in-a-while event. It's daily, sometimes multiple times a day. By your mid-30s, your back aches like that of a modern office worker who's been slouching at a desk for 40 years. Your knees creak, your shoulders burn, and your hands. They're calloused, cracked, and scarred. Every finger a permanent injury report. The dungeon doesn't help either. The floors are uneven and slick with mold, so slipping and bruising is part of the job. Splinters from wooden stocks pierce your skin. Iron shackles and chains pinch fingers. One careless step near a brazier, and you're left with burns that never heal properly. And let's not even talk about the smell. Actually, the stench that never leaves. Imagine living inside a trash bin. That's also a butcher's shop in the middle of summer. That's your dungeon. The smell of human sweat, unwashed bodies, spilled blood, mildew, and rotting straw mixes into an aroma so foul it feels like it has weight. You breathe it, taste it, and eventually carry it home in your hair and clothes. Bathing doesn't solve it. Medieval soap is basically a greasy mixture of animal fat and ashes. It masks nothing. So when you go to the tavern after a long day, people can smell your occupation before they even see you. The baker avoids brushing against your hand when giving you bread. Children whisper, "That's him," before scurrying away. You are, quite literally, the stink that clears a room. Illness and disease, but smell is the least of your worries. Working in a dungeon is like volunteering for a medical experiment, except you didn't volunteer. Every cut or scrape has the potential to kill you. Rusty iron tools slice skin open, straw on the floor harbors fleas and lice, and blood from prisoners carries diseases nobody understands. Infection is almost guaranteed. Without antibiotics, a tiny wound on your finger can swell into a festering, pus-filled nightmare. And your lungs, they're on a ticking clock. Torches smoke up the air, mold grows unchecked on the damp walls, and straw dust fills every corner. Breathing feels like inhaling dirt. Chronic cough becomes a constant soundtrack to your life, and nobody cares, except maybe your neighbors, who complain about your hacking at night. Many torturers don't live long. They burn out physically before reaching old age. Their bodies collapse under the weight of infection, bad food, and years of toxic work conditions. In short, if the angry mob doesn't get you, your lungs will, the emotional backpack. Now let's peek into the heaviest baggage of all, your mind. Torturing people isn't just hard on the body, it eats away at your sanity. Every scream echoes in your ears long after the chains fall silent. You dream of eyes wide with terror, mouths open in agony, and the sound of bones cracking. Sleep offers no escape, because your nightmares replay the dungeon in endless loops. Some torturers convince themselves it's just a job, better me than someone else. Others harden into cruelty, laughing at the pain as a way of numbing their own. But deep down the guilt lurks. The brain knows the difference between survival and sadism. It whispers in the dark. What kind of person am I? There's no therapy, no counselor, no sympathetic ear. Admitting you're haunted by your work would brand you weak or cursed. So you drown your thoughts in ale, drink until the screams fade, and wake up hungover, only to return to the dungeon and do it all again. Society's judgment. Here's the cruelest twist. Society needs you, but it despises you. You're a tool of justice, yet also a social pariah. Nobles hire you. Judges order your services. Priests look the other way, justifying it as God's punishment. But when you step outside your workplace, nobody wants to stand near you. You're feared, avoided, and ridiculed behind your back. At the market, people whisper, "There he is, the torturer." Mothers pull children closer. If you try to join a festival, the crowd parts like the Red Sea, not out of respect, but disgust. Your reputation enters the room before you do, and it isn't welcome. Ironically, the only people who treat you with civility are the very criminals you torture. They bow, beg, or bribe you, not because they like you, but because survival depends on it. Your power is real, but so is your isolation. Reputation without respect. Think of your name as medieval clickbait. It spreads fast, everybody knows it, and nobody actually wants the content. You are the walking headline of fear. Parents use you as a bedtime threat. Go to sleep, or the torturer will come for you. Children peek at you from behind their mother's skirts, then run off screaming. Meanwhile, the nobles you serve mock you over wine. Priests call you sinful in their sermons. And peasants, they share crude jokes about how you probably eat dinner with rats. You're indispensable but disposable, needed but hated, famous but forgotten the second you're gone. And that contradiction? It cuts deeper than any blade you've ever held. Transitions, so, yes, congratulations again. You're strong, feared, and infamous. But underneath the scars, the smells, and the whispers, you're breaking. Every day chips away at you. Your health, your sanity, your reputation. And the worst part? Tomorrow you'll pick up the tools again, because in this world, you're trapped in the role everyone despises but can't live without. So, you've survived another day in the dungeon. Congratulations. Again, you're still alive, still coughing, still stinking of mildew and misery. But don't celebrate just yet, because beyond the aching muscles, the rotting lungs, and the bloodstains on your clothes, there's another set of challenges waiting for you, the kind that cut deeper than any blade in your arsenal. Poverty in disguise. You might think being the torturer pays well. After all, you've got a steady job, high-demand services, and powerful clients. But reality check. You're not raking in gold. Torturers were often paid less than a decent craftsman. A blacksmith could forge horseshoes and feed his family comfortably. You break bones and barely scrape enough for stale bread and a roof that leaks when it rains. Your meals are a cruel joke. Breakfast. Thin porridge with the consistency of wall paste. Lunch. Bread so hard you could use it as a weapon. Dinner. Watery ale, and maybe, if you're lucky, a scrap of salted meat. Even peasants sometimes ate better. At least their stew had vegetables. And because of your reputation, some merchants overcharge you, as if your very coins are cursed. You can't argue. Who's going to defend the torturer? So you pay more for less? Your purse always light? Your belly always half empty? Loneliness as a lifestyle. Here's the part nobody tells you. Being a torturer is a one-way ticket to loneliness. Who would want to marry you? Who would want to share a home with the person everyone avoids at the market? Even if you manage to find a spouse, The strain is unbearable. Your partner deals with constant gossip. How can she live with that monster? What kind of man raises children after boiling people alive? Your children, if you have any, grow up bullied and shunned, carrying your cursed reputation like an anchor around their necks. So many torturers lived alone, isolated in small houses at the edge of town, closer to the gallows than to the church bells. Even your dog, if you have one, probably eyes you nervously when you sharpen your tools. Fear of retribution. Every job has risks, right? But in your line of work, the risks are more personal. You make enemies daily. Enemies with family members, friends, or entire villages ready to hate you forever. Imagine walking home after a long day, only to feel eyes on your back. Is that villager following you? Or are you just paranoid? Did someone slip poison into your ale at the tavern? Will an angry mob gather at your door one night, torches blazing, demanding your blood for all the lives you've ruined? This fear never leaves you. You sleep lightly, always ready to grab a weapon. You never fully trust anyone, not the baker, not your neighbors, not even your colleagues. Because every smile could hide a grudge, and every handshake could be the last friendly gesture you ever get. The mental unraveling, and then there's the psychological toll. What happens when the guilt, paranoia, and nightmares stew together for years? Some torturers descend into cruelty, convincing themselves that enjoying the job makes it easier. Others withdraw completely, becoming hollow shells, speaking only when necessary, drifting like ghosts through town. Your brain starts playing tricks on you. A baby's cry sounds too much like a prisoner screaming. The creak of a chair makes you flinch, remembering the rack. Even silence feels heavy, as if the dungeon follows you everywhere. Some historians suggest that torturers often turn to religion for relief, begging priests for forgiveness in secret. But forgiveness was tricky. How do you cleanse a soul that spends its days pulling souls apart? Hypocrisy of the powerful. Here's the cruelest irony. The very nobles and priests who condemn you in public use your services in private. A judge who preaches about morality hires you to extract confessions. A priest who warns against sin sends you prisoners accused of heresy. A noble who mocks you at feasts demands that you make his enemies talk. They call you filthy, sinful, cursed, but they keep you busy because their power depends on your work. You are both tool and scapegoat, valued when convenient, despised when visible. It's like being the town's garbage man. Everyone needs the trash taken out, but nobody wants to invite you for dinner. The reputation. You can't escape. Your reputation clings tighter than your stench. Even if you wanted to quit, where would you go? Nobody hires a former torturer to tend sheep or mend shoes. Farmers don't want you in their fields. Guilds won't accept your cursed hands. You're trapped in the role, locked in as tightly as any prisoner you've ever chained. The dungeon becomes not just your workplace, but your identity. And the longer you stay, the less you recognize the person you were before. You stop being John or Henry or Pierre. You're simply the torturer. Forever. Dark humor in despair. At some point, you either laugh or break. So you joke about your situation. Morbid humor becomes your shield. You think your job stinks. At least your clients don't scream when you show up. Romance is tough. Every date ends with, "So, what do you do for a living? Retirement plan? Oh yeah. Probably being buried in the same pit as my prisoners. It's grim, but it's all you've got." Humor is the last defense between you and the abyss, the slow erosion of humanity. Here's the ultimate suffering. Little by little, you lose pieces of yourself. First, it's your health, then your relationships, then your reputation, finally, your humanity. One day you wake up and realize you no longer flinch at screams. You no longer question orders. You no longer dream of a better life. You've become what everyone feared. A monster, not by nature, but by profession. And that's the deepest cut of all. Transition. So yes, you're famous. Congratulations. You're the story parents whisper to frightened children, the figure people cross the street to avoid, the man history pretends not to remember. Strong in body, weak in spirit, essential but unwanted. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, the cycle continues. Because in this world, there's no escape from the suffering that comes with your job. So far, you've seen the torturer's daily struggles, the aching back, the foul smells, the nightmares. But there's another layer to your miserable career, society itself. Because in the Middle Ages, your job wasn't just about inflicting pain. It was about serving forces bigger than you, religion, royalty, politics, and being a pawn in games you never truly controlled. You weren't simply a man with tools. You were the long arm of kings, the shadow of priests, the enforcer of laws scribbled by nobles who never set foot inside a dungeon. Religion, God's will or human cruelty. In a world where nearly every event was explained through God, demons or fate, torture wasn't just allowed, it was holy. At least, that's how the church framed it. If someone was accused of heresy, sorcery or witchcraft, the church claimed their soul was in danger. And what better way to save that soul than by breaking the body? According to clerical logic, forcing a confession under torment was a kind of spiritual medicine. Never mind that most confessions were just screams of desperation. The church got what it wanted, and you, the torturer, were the instrument of divine justice. Imagine sitting in a cathedral, listening to a sermon where the priest thunders about God's wrath against sinners. Then he points to you, not by name but by role, as the earthly reminder of that wrath. People cross themselves when you pass. They don't see you as a man. They see you as God's hammer. A terrifying thought, considering you barely managed to wash dungeon grime out of your beard this morning. The king's dirty work if religion gave you divine purpose. Kings and nobles gave you political orders. Torture was a convenient way for rulers to enforce their power without dirtying their own hands. Say a nobleman suspects his rival of treason. Does he fight him fairly? Of course not. He hands the man over to you. You extract a confession, and suddenly the rival is guilty. His lands confiscated, his family disgraced. You didn't just break bones, you broke bloodlines. And what did you get out of it? Nothing but more hate from the townsfolk. They didn't blame the king, who lived in a castle dripping with luxury. They blamed you, the man in the dungeon, the one who delivered the screams they couldn't ignore. In truth, you were the perfect shield. Kings and judges could look noble and just while you played the villain. Every lash of your whip covered their lies. Every shattered bone protected their thrones. Politics of fear torture wasn't just punishment. It was theatre. Public executions, for example, weren't really about justice. They were about spectacle, control, and keeping peasants in line. Picture this: a wooden scaffold in the town square. You're there, standing beside your tools. The crowd gathers, children perched on shoulders, vendors selling roasted nuts as if this is a fair. The accused is dragged up trembling, and all eyes turn to you. The king's men want fear, the priests want obedience, and the peasants, they want gossip. You, the torturer, deliver all three in one bloody performance. When you pull a lever, stretch a body, or drive an iron into flesh, you're not just hurting one person, you're sending a message. This is what happens when you step out of line. It's propaganda, medieval style. The pawn in a larger game, the worst part. You had no say in any of it. You didn't decide who was guilty. You didn't set the laws. You didn't write the sermons. You just carried out the orders. You were the blunt instrument of power, swung by hands wealthier and holier than yours. A bishop might sleep in silk sheets while you reeked of dungeon mold, but in the eyes of the townsfolk, you were both equally terrifying. The bishop's sermons condemned, the king's court judged, but your iron tools made their words real. And when history books were written, the bishop was remembered as pious, the king as mighty, you forgotten, or worse, remembered only as the torturer. The Witch of Würzburg. Take the witch trials in Würzburg, Germany in the 1600s. Dozens of people, mostly women, some children, were accused of witchcraft. The bishop wanted results. He wanted confessions, proof that Satan was at work. Who carried out his will? The torturers. Women screamed that they flew on broomsticks, danced with demons, poisoned cattle, all because the pain forced words out of them. Some confessions were absurd. One child claimed he could summon toads with magic, but once the words were out, they were written down, stamped with authority, and used as proof. And the torturers? They weren't named in the records. Just the instruments of the court, invisible pawns who made the bishop's paranoia into truth. Immersive moment. Your role imagine. Standing in the shadows of a great stone hall, torches flickering on banners of lions and crosses. A noble points to you. A prisoner kneels in chains, accused of plotting against the crown. You step forward, tools clinking at your side. Everyone else stands tall in finery. Judges in robes, knights in armor, priests in holy vestments. You, in your stained clothes, are the only one expected to get your hands dirty. The noble's gaze says everything. Do it. Make him talk. You don't speak. You just bow slightly, take the prisoner by the arm, and drag him back into the shadows where the screams won't interrupt the banquet. That's your life in a nutshell. Serving men who would never share your table. Carrying out orders that guarantee you'll never sit comfortably in a church pew again. Transition so, in the grand theatre of medieval society, you weren't just a worker, you were a symbol. Religion used you as proof of God's wrath. Kings used you as proof of their strength. Politics used you as a warning to the masses. And through it all, you remained invisible. A tool everyone needed, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. But what about the bigger stories? The scandals, the famous cases, the trials that shook entire kingdoms? That's where your role becomes both unforgettable and completely forgotten. If part 1 showed how you were the pawn of kings and priests, part 2 shows how history itself turned you into both an executioner and an invisible servant. Your name rarely appeared in records, yet your work shaped entire kingdoms, toppled families, and fueled some of the darkest spectacles in human memory. The scandal of Joan of Arc's few stories reveal the twisted overlap of religion, politics, and torture, quite like the trial of Joan of Arc. Imagine this. A 19-year-old peasant girl claims she hears voices from God telling her to lead France to victory against the English. Miraculously, she does. Armies rally behind her. Nobles tremble at her influence. But the moment politics shifts, Joan becomes too dangerous. Captured by the English, she is accused of heresy. The trial is stacked against her. Dozens of theologians, bishops, and judges twisting her words. Torture is threatened constantly, hanging over her like the sword of Damocles. While she was never formally tortured on the rack, the threat alone was enough to break her spirit. And who provided that threat? You, the torturer. You stood silently in the courtroom, your tools nearby. You didn't need to use them. Your very presence screamed louder than any sermon. Confess, or you'll feel the iron. Joan was burned alive in 1431. Her ashes scattered into the Seine. The king distanced himself. The bishops wrote volumes defending their decisions. You, forgotten again. Your silent role erased, yet crucial to the fear that crushed her. The Knights Templar, from glory to dungeon. Now picture another scandal, the fall of the Knights Templar. These warrior monks once ruled Europe's finances, guarding pilgrims and loaning money to kings. But in 1307, King Philip IV of France decided he'd had enough of their power and their wealth. So what did he do? He accused them of heresy, of course. You, the torturer, suddenly had some of the most famous men in Christendom in your dungeon. Proud knights, sworn to God, dragged before you in chains. And under your persuasion, They confess to spitting on the cross, worshipping idols, even kissing each other in forbidden ways. Historians now know most of these confessions were nonsense, fabrications squeezed out by pain and fear, but at the time they were gold. The Pope dissolved the Templars, their leaders burned at the stake, and Philip? He seized their treasures. Once again, the torturer played the invisible hand, extracting truth that was nothing more than survival screams. Without you, Philip's accusations would have collapsed. With you, they became gospel. The theatre of Inquisition. Let's not forget the Inquisition, perhaps the ultimate marriage of torture and belief. Your dungeon wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was an extension of the church itself. Priests oversaw the process. Judges dictated the script. But you were the stagehand who set everything in motion. Imagine dragging in a trembling old woman accused of witchcraft. The inquisitors ask calm, polite questions. She denies everything. Then the inquisitor gives you a nod. That's your cue. Out come the thumbscrews, the strappado, the iron boots. Suddenly, her denials crumble into babbling confessions about midnight dances with the devil. The inquisitors smile. Justice is served. The woman is condemned. You untie her, drag her broken body away, and disappear into the shadows. No thanks. No recognition. Just another job well done in the twisted machinery of faith. Torture as entertainment, as grim as it sounds, society often treated your work like a public show. Executions weren't just punishments, they were festivals. Crowds gathered early, children on shoulders, vendors selling bread and ale, drums rolled, trumpets blared, and when the condemned was brought forward, eyes turned to you. Your role was the climax. Whether stretching a man on the wheel, burning a witch, or dismembering a traitor, you were the dark centerpiece of civic entertainment. Think of it like a medieval Netflix special, except instead of binge-watching from bed, peasants watched live, and the episode ended in real blood. And while you gave the performance, the lords and bishops sat in comfort, watching from reserved seats, never dirtying their own hands. They applauded when the crowd gasped, but afterward they slipped away, their reputations intact. You were left with the gore. The irony of fame in a way, you were famous. Everyone in town knew who you were. Children whispered your name at night, daring each other to walk past your house. Men avoided your stare at taverns. Women clutched their rosaries when you passed by. Congratulations. You were the medieval celebrity no one wanted to meet. But here's the cruel twist. You were famous for all the wrong reasons. A king might be hated, but also admired. A priest might be feared, but also respected. You were simply feared, a walking nightmare, useful only as long as someone needed pain extracted. The irony is sharp. Your work shaped kingdoms, yet your legacy is faceless. The rulers wrote their names into history. You left only screams. The scandal of the Pazzi conspiracy. Let's drop into Italy for a moment. 1478. The powerful Medici family is attacked during Mass in Florence. Giuliano de' Medici is stabbed to death. His brother Lorenzo barely escapes. The conspirators are caught, of course. And who gets the honor of interrogating them? You. Nobles, priests, even bankers. Men who once strolled proudly through Florence suddenly dangle from ropes in your chamber. Under torment, they reveal names, plots, alliances. The entire conspiracy unravels. The Medici tighten their grip on Florence. Their enemies lie broken or dead. And yet again, history remembers Lorenzo as Il Magnifico, the great patron of art and learning. You, the torturer, remain nameless, just the man in the shadows who ensured Florence's Renaissance didn't collapse. Immersive closing, so here you stand, surrounded by the pillars of medieval society. Behind you, the church, cloaked in incense and holy chants. Beside you, the nobility, dripping in jewels and silks. In front of you, the trembling prisoner, chained and helpless. And you? You are the hand that ties them all together. The priest speaks of God's wrath. The noble whispers of treason. The politician demands order. But none of it becomes real until you lift your tools. The crowd will gasp. The records will be written. The rulers will celebrate. But you will return to your home with the smell of iron and blood clinging to your hands. Because in medieval society, you weren't just a worker. You were the unacknowledged cornerstone of power. Transition so far. You've seen how society used you as a symbol, a scapegoat, and an invisible instrument of authority. But what about the future? What about legacy, memory, and how torturers fit, or don't fit, into the larger story of history? That's where our journey takes us next. The dungeon doors slam shut behind you, iron bolts clanging like the closing credits of a particularly grim movie. For everyone else in the city, nightfall is a time of prayer, supper, maybe a song by the fire. For you, it's the awkward commute home after a long day of breaking bones for a living. The walk home. No cobblestone road has ever felt longer than the one between the torture chamber and your front door. First, there's the smell. No matter how many buckets of water you splash on yourself, you carry the dungeon with you. Smoke, sweat, blood, and that metallic tang of iron. People can smell you before they see you. They part like the Red Sea when you pass. Mothers pulling children aside. Vendors pretending to adjust their stalls just so they don't have to make eye contact. It's the medieval equivalent of walking onto the subway after working in a fish market all day. Except your fish screamed, cursed your name, and occasionally threw up on your shoes. And let's not forget the looks. Some people glare as if you're personally responsible for their cousin's execution. Others lower their eyes, whispering prayers under their breath, as if staring at you might invite divine punishment. Every step is a reminder that you are known, but not welcomed. Supper, if you can call it. That by the time you reach your home, usually a small, modest house near the edge of town, supper might be waiting. But here's the thing. Appetite and torture don't mix well. Picture this. You sit at the wooden table, a loaf of coarse bread in front of you, maybe a bowl of thin stew. Your wife asks, "How was your day?" And what do you say? "Oh, you know, just another day stretching a baker," until he admitted to shorting customers on flour. Not exactly dinner conversation. The stew is flavoured with turnips, onions, maybe a scrap of salted pork if it's payday. And yet, every bite seems to carry an aftertaste of the dungeon. You find yourself chewing, and suddenly, you're remembering a prisoner's broken teeth clattering on the floor. Appetite gone, your family notices. Maybe your kids push food around nervously, wondering why dad stares into his bowl like it holds the secrets of the universe. Your wife forces a smile, tries to talk about the neighbours or the rising price of wool. But the shadow of your work sits at the table with you, an invisible guest who never leaves. Family bonds, thin as thread. Being a torturer doesn't exactly win you Father of the Year. Your children learn early that their classmates avoid them. Whispers follow them through the streets. That's the hangman's boy. Friendships dissolve before they can start. Invitations to feast days mysteriously never arrive. At home, they tiptoe around you. You're not a monster to them, you're dad. But even children can sense the unspoken tension. Sometimes they ask innocent questions. Why do people look at us like that? You don't have a good answer. Your wife, meanwhile, walks a tightrope. She depends on your wages, but the social cost is enormous. Market women give her suspicious glances, as if cruelty is contagious. She smiles politely, overpays for bread, and hurries home. She never brags about your job, never mentions it unless she has to. For her, you're not a husband with a stable profession. You're the man who keeps her just one whispered rumour away from exile. Love might exist, but it's heavy, complicated, and burdened by fear. Even within your own home, you're half a provider, half a pariah. Coping mechanisms. So how do you cope? Short answer, ale. The medieval tavern is your sanctuary, a smoky wooden room filled with drunks, dice games, and the constant smell of spilled beer. It's the only place where you can briefly blur the edges of memory. But even here, you're not just another face. The regulars keep their distance. The innkeeper pours your drink without small talk, sliding the mug across the table like it's cursed. And when you finally work up the nerve to join a game of dice, the other players suddenly remember chores at home. So you drink alone, staring into your cup like it's a mirror. The first mug burns away the metallic taste of the dungeon. The second dulls the ringing in your ears. By the third, you're almost able to laugh at the absurdity of it all, until the door creaks open and someone walks in who recognizes you. Then the laughter dies. It's a cycle. Drown the memories. Feel the stairs. Stumble home. Repeat. Nightmares and shadows. And when the ale wears off, when the house is quiet and the candles burn down, the nightmares creep in. You lie in bed, the straw mattress prickling your skin, and you hear them, phantom screams echoing in your ears. Sometimes it's the prisoners you worked on that day. Sometimes it's faces from years ago, still vivid, still broken. You wake drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the sheets twisted around you like ropes. Sleep becomes a battlefield. Too little of it and you're exhausted at work. Too much and you risk seeing their eyes again. Some nights you don't even try. You sit by the fire, staring into the flames, pretending that the crackling wood is the only sound you hear. And when dawn breaks, when the church bell tolls for morning prayers, you rise, wash your face, and prepare to do it all again. Humor in the darkness, of course. Humans are experts at finding humor in misery. Even you develop a dark sense of irony. You joke to yourself that you're the medieval version of customer service. Everyone hates you, but the system can't function without you. You wonder if centuries from now someone will look back and say, "Wow, that torturer really nailed his job," literally. When your shoes wear out, you mutter that they probably dissolved from all the nervous sweat dripping onto them. When your neighbors avoid you, you imagine putting up a sign outside your house. Torturer, scaring peasants since 1347. The jokes don't fix the loneliness, but they make it bearable. Sometimes humor is the only armor left when you spend your days tearing other people apart. Transition, so ends your evening. A long walk through hostile stairs, a strained dinner, a mug of ale too many, and a restless night of half sleep. By dawn the cycle begins again, but let's go deeper. Beyond the daily routine, what happens when the weight of this job crushes you completely? How does a torturer wrestle with the isolation, the scorn, and the slow erosion of his soul? That's where we'll head next. When morning screams fade into memory, the rest of the day belongs to you. Or at least, that's the illusion. Because in truth, the dungeon follows you everywhere. Gossip in the shadows. Let's be honest, townspeople love to gossip. And if you're the torturer, you're practically the town's favorite scandal. Behind closed shutters, whispers float. Did you hear? He made a merchant confess yesterday. They say he pulled out 3 nails before the poor man screamed about stolen grain. Someone else replies, "Well, better him than us. You're the headline of medieval small talk. Unlike a blacksmith or a baker whose work is visible and harmless, your craft feeds curiosity wrapped in fear. And while no one dares confront you directly, their silence in your presence is louder than words. For your family, it's worse. Your children catch fragments at church. That's the hangman's son. Your wife overhears muttered prayers as she shops. God help her. She sleeps next to a demon. Every insult slices deep, not just at you, but at the people you love most. Coping through faith and superstition, how do you survive that weight? Many torturers clung to religion, sometimes fiercely, sometimes hypocritically. Picture yourself kneeling in a candlelit church, the same hands that tightened racks now folded in prayer. You whisper for forgiveness, for strength, for numbness. Some priests avoid eye contact, unsure whether you're an instrument of God's justice or just another sinner. Others reassure you with the same words. The Lord uses all men as tools. You nod. though you're never sure if they're comforting you or excusing themselves for working alongside you. And when religion fails to soothe, superstition fills the gap. A lucky charm tucked under your shirt, a sprig of herbs on the windowsill to ward off spirits, maybe even a whispered chant before bed, not for God's ears, but to silence the phantom screams that creep into your dreams. The lonely hearth evenings by the fire are quieter than you'd like. Your children slip off to bed early, whispering in the dark. Your wife mends clothes, the rhythmic motion of her hands the only sound in the room. You try to start conversation. I saw the smith today. He's reforging the mare's cart. She nods, says nothing. The silence stretches. You know what she's thinking. The smith chats freely with his neighbours. The mayor invites him for wine. Your work only earns stares and closed doors. Loneliness doesn't roar. It hums quietly like an itch beneath the skin. You're surrounded by people yet isolated. A ghost haunting your own home. Escape in the bottle, of course. There's always drink, ale, mead, wine if you're lucky. It's cheaper than therapy and just as addictive. 1 cup dulls the guilt. 2 make you brave enough to laugh. 3, they carry you into forgetfulness. Some nights, you stumble home so late that your wife bars the door. You sleep outside on the stoop, cloaked in shame and the chill of night. In the morning, she says nothing, but the look in her eyes says everything. This isn't the man she married, just the husk of one, slowly rotting from the inside. Facing yourself, the cruelest punishment isn't from neighbours or priests, it's from your own reflection. You wash in a cracked basin, water rippling as you splash your face, but the man staring back at you isn't the boy who once dreamed of adventure. His eyes are sunken, shadowed by sleepless nights. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from memory. Scars line his knuckles where angry prisoners bit or scratched him, and yet the reflection still smirks sometimes, because deep down, you know you've become skilled at something others couldn't stomach. Not proud, not ashamed, just resigned. The irony is sharp. You mastered an art nobody admires, perfected a craft nobody thanks you for. Humor as armor, so you tell jokes, dark ones, whispered to yourself, while you sharpen tools or walk alone. Some men build bridges, I build nightmares. Other fathers bring home bread, I bring home silence. Job security? Torture never goes out of style. They're not funny in the traditional sense. They're shields. If you can laugh at yourself, maybe you can survive another day of being the man nobody wants to see. Dreams that won't let go when night finally comes. Rest doesn't follow. Some dreams replay the dungeon. Faces twisted in agony, voices crying your name. Others are worse. Prisoners chasing you, turning tools against you. Laughter echoing as you beg for mercy. You wake gasping, sometimes screaming, sweat soaking the sheets. Your wife stirs, sometimes holding you, sometimes turning away, too exhausted to comfort you again. The children pretend not to hear, but in the morning, their eyes are heavy, shadows of fear beneath them. Sleep isn't peace. It's just another battlefield you fight nightly. The double life. Here's the strangest part. Despite the stares, despite the nightmares, you still maintain a double life. By day, you're the torturer. By night, you try to be a husband, a father, a neighbour. You patch your roof. You chop firewood. You carry buckets of water from the well. Ordinary chores that almost make you feel human again. But no matter how hard you try, the mask slips. A neighbour waves, then remembers who you are. A child runs up with a ball, then snatches it back nervously. You're never just you. You're always the torturer, even in moments of normalcy. Immersive closing. So the end of your day is never truly an end. The dungeon follows you home, sits at your table, slips into your bed, and crawls into your dreams. By sunrise, you've barely shaken off yesterday, yet you must rise again. The bell tolls, summoning you back to the chamber of screams. Your neighbors pretend not to see you pass. Your wife lowers her eyes. Your children retreat into silence. And you shoulder your tools, walk back into the darkness, and repeat the cycle, day after day, night after night. Because being a medieval torturer wasn't just a job, it was a life sentence. When your life ends, your story doesn't stop. The dungeon door closes behind you. Your tools rust away, and your family name fades. But history remembers. The question is, how does it remember? And for the medieval torturer, the answer is complicated, messy, and often more myth than fact. How history recorded them. If you scan medieval chronicles, you won't always find a torturer's name. Kings, queens, knights, bishops, they get the spotlight. Torturers? They lurk in the footnotes. Anonymous, shadowy, described only as the executioner or the inquisitor's hand. This anonymity was deliberate. Chroniclers weren't eager to glorify the man who twisted the rack or tightened the thumbscrews. Instead, they treated you like a shadow, necessary but unworthy of identity. It's like being part of the orchestra but never listed in the program, and yet, in rare cases, your name does slip through. A note about Hans the Torturer in Nuremberg, a reference to Pierre, who worked under the Inquisition in Toulouse, usually mentioned with disgust or cold neutrality. Pierre extracted the truth. Imagine living an entire life, only to be remembered in one bleak sentence. No legacy of honor, no proud lineage, just a line of ink describing what you did to another human being. The myth of the sadistic monster, as centuries passed, myths grew. Torturers weren't remembered as people. They became monsters in the public imagination. Stories claimed you enjoyed your work, laughing while prisoners screamed. Paintings from later centuries depicted you with wild eyes, crooked smiles, gleaming teeth. Pamphlets whispered that torturers made deals with the devil, sharpening their tools under the moonlight while chanting wicked prayers. The reality? Most torturers probably hated their work, or at least treated it as grim necessity. But the myth of the sadistic villain was too irresistible for storytellers to ignore. Audiences love simple categories: saint versus sinner, hero versus villain. And since your job involved screams, blood and chains, history assigned you to the villain's role. In truth, you were more bureaucrat than beast, a man with orders to follow, wages to collect, and nightmares to endure. But nuance doesn't sell stories. Average guy with a terrible job isn't as gripping as evil torturer who enjoyed every second. Myths versus facts. Let's break down a few. Myth: torturers invented elaborate tools just for fun. Fact: most devices were crude adaptations of existing tools. The rack, basically a stretched out loom. The wheel, originally for transportation, repurposed for breaking bones. Creativity wasn't about sadism, it was about cheap efficiency. Myth: torturers lived in mansions, paid lavishly for their services. Fact: in most towns, torturers earned barely enough to survive. Sometimes they got free lodging, but more often they lived on the edge of poverty. Nobility didn't throw banquets for them, they threw scraps. Myth: every torturer was personally evil. Fact: evil is convenient shorthand. Reality was messier. Some were reluctant, some indifferent, a few maybe cruel. But most were trapped in roles society both demanded and despised. It's easier to paint the torturer as a devil than to admit societies, including kings, priests and judges, relied on him to maintain order. Religion and redemption myths. Another myth: that torturers could never find peace in God's eyes. Medieval sermons sometimes painted you as damned, cursed, unredeemable. Yet paradoxically, church authorities also hired you. So which was it? Were you an agent of divine justice or a sinner condemned? Depends who you asked. The contradiction shows how uncomfortable society was with your role. You were both useful and revolting, both servant of the law and stain on humanity. In legends, Some torturers repented dramatically, tossing tools into rivers, burning racks, entering monasteries. Whether true or not, these tales reflect society's need for closure. People wanted to believe the monster could transform into a man again. Decline of the profession, the beginning. By the 17th and 18th centuries, torture began to decline, at least officially. Enlightenment thinkers like Cesare Beccaria argued that pain doesn't equal truth. Legal reforms slowly outlawed torture in many European states. Judges turned to evidence, testimony, and procedure rather than screams in the dungeon. For torturers, this was both liberation and execution. On one hand, fewer jobs meant fewer nights filled with blood. On the other, it meant losing the only career you'd ever known. A blacksmith could pivot to carpentry, but what does a former torturer put on his resume? Expert in pain management? Specialist in confession extraction? Not exactly transferable skills. Some melted into anonymity, working odd jobs, hiding their pasts. Others clung to executioner roles, since executions lingered long after torture declined. A few became local legends. The last torturer of Paris, the hangman of Prague. The profession didn't vanish overnight. It faded like a candle sputtering before it dies, leaving behind myths more enduring than the men themselves. A legacy nobody wants, and so, when people look back on the medieval torturer, they don't see a father, a neighbor, or a man cursed by circumstance. They see a caricature, a twisted figure in a dungeon, laughing in the dark. Your true legacy isn't in books or statues. It's in nightmares, ghost stories, and the collective imagination. Parents once used you as a threat. Behave, or the torturer will come for you. That's not a legacy of respect. It's a legacy of fear. Ironically, the people who commanded you, judges, bishops, kings, are remembered as lawmakers, builders, leaders. Their statues stand in squares, their names etched in marble. And you are remembered as a shadow with blood on your hands. Congratulations, you became immortal, but only as a warning. And so, your long day as a medieval torturer comes to an end. The torches in the dungeon have burned low. The smell of smoke and iron lingers in the air, and somewhere above, the city is settling into sleep. You trudge home, your body aching, your mind buzzing with echoes you'd rather forget. And yet, in history's strange way, you've become more than a man. You've become a symbol of pain, of fear, of the darkness that kings and priests never wanted to touch with their own hands. It's not glamorous, it's not heroic, and it's certainly not enviable. The truth is simple. Being a torturer in the Middle Ages sucked. The food was bad, the company worse, and the nightmares followed you everywhere. You didn't get respect, you didn't get fame, and if people remembered you at all, it was usually as the shadow in someone else's story. But here's the comforting part. You're lying in your bed right now, not in a dungeon. You have soft pillows, clean sheets, maybe even the gentle hum of a fan instead of the rattle of chains. Nobody is asking you to sharpen the rack before breakfast. Nobody is calling for confessions in the middle of the night. Whatever stress you carry in your life, at least you can say you're not a medieval torturer. So take a breath. Let the weight of history fade into the background. Let the darkness of the past become just a story. Strange, unsettling, but distant. Your eyes can grow heavy, your thoughts can soften, and sleep can come easily now. And as you drift off, remember, history is full of misery, but tonight, it can also be your lullaby. Thank you for joining me in this journey through boring history for sleep. If you'd like to hear more strange, forgotten, and slightly miserable stories from the past, don't forget to subscribe. There's always another tale waiting, dark enough to make you curious, calm enough to help you rest. Good night, sleep well, and above all, be glad you live here and now, not in a medieval dungeon.